All right. Good afternoon, or good morning, or evening to everyone, wherever you're joining us from, and welcome to this Ethics Lab webinar. My name is Anyan Yamju, and I'm a senior research officer here at the Ethics Lab. Just to say again, thank you for joining this webinar and to let you know that it's being recorded. So if you're uncomfortable with having your camera on, with that information in mind, that's all right. We're going to be talking about a topic of growing global urgency and significance today, which is AI safety. And given the rapid development of artificial intelligence, conversations about safety and ethics are often shaped by powerful global actors. And today we'll be turning our attention to the African context where questions of AI governance, infrastructure, and social and economic realities bring different dimensions to the conversation. And so to explore this, we are very thrilled to be joined by Dr. Samuel Segun, who is a senior researcher at the Global Center on AI Governance. Dr. Segun's work focuses on AI safety, data ethics, and responsible AI practice. And he's published widely on these themes, including recent and forthcoming volumes with Springer and Cambridge University Press. And he also brings significant policy experience through his roles with the United Nations and several different African research institutions. In this talk, where he'll speak for about 25 minutes, followed by a question and answer session, he's going to explore three key risk areas of AI, including malicious use, malfunction, and systemic risks, offering us insights into how we can pursue AI safety in ways that are inclusive, locally grounded, and development focused. Please welcome me in joining Dr. Segun, and of course, please turn off your mic so that we don't interrupt his presentation. Samuel, over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Ayer. Thanks for having me. So I'll just try to share my screen and then we can begin. Yes. Can I get a thumbs up when you can see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Perfect. So I'll be speaking about AI safety, but from an African place. And this is it's just like a synoptic view of a white paper we're currently working on, focused on the same topic. The goal is to talk about AI safety in the context of Africa and to be able to properly ground, address or identify what the issues are and better come up with frameworks, policy recommendations, and the like on how to address these risks that we find. And I'd like to preface by saying that Africa is uniquely placed at the moment, and this is a conversation that has been going on for quite a while. We are still at the back foot. Much of the AI tools are being built outside of Africa, and those being built in Africa rely heavily on tools that are, gotten from, say, North America or Southeast Asia in the context of China. And so what I would do first is to lay the groundwork, and then I would identify some of the challenges or the risks with AI safety in Africa. And then I proceed to talk about a few recommendations. I would not be very detailed, and I would hope that during the question and answer segment, we'll get more questions that will allow us to go in depth to discuss some of these things. So I'll start with the idea or the notion, the concept of AI safety. So AI safety is a field, an interdisciplinary field now that is concerned with identifying and addressing the security and ethical or even environmental, socioeconomic risks that AI pose, particularly highly advanced AI systems. In some definitions, the focus is on frontier models and the effect frontier models will have, and as well as the effect superintelligence systems or artificial general intelligence systems would have. By the way, I'm making an assumption here that a number of us on this call have some background in the field, so I might be using some technical terms to just describe what I mean. And if you're not familiar with them or conversant to them, please feel free to drop a question, and then I'll try to address that subsequently. Now, there are a couple of reasons why we need to talk about AI safety, one of which is that it helps us better prevent and manage unintended harms to human. It can help us also mitigate biases and discrimination, which AI systems are very prone to have. It could also help us to ensure the reliability of the system. So if we talk about AI safety, then we'll talk about mitigation measures and guardrails that we could put in place to better ensure the reliability and robustness of the systems. It could also guide against misuse of AI systems. I often say that unlike nuclear weapons, where by the time you start to amass uranium, the world, or at least the governing authorities, get to identify that you are doing so. With AI, no one really knows. You could build an AI model in your bedroom and or in your garage, and no one will have an idea what you're doing, and you could use it for malicious ends or to malicious ends, and still no one would know. So it's a lot more complex to guard against misuse of AI, but it's important to talk about this so we can better have, some sort of guidance on how we could do that. It could also help in promoting trust and adoption. When people see that the development process is ethically grounded, it could help build trust in the use of the system, and also help to upscale the adoption of the system as well. It could help support government in its regulation and governance of the systems itself. It could also help us anticipate what long-term risks could look like, and also protect vulnerable population, particularly population that these AI systems might be used to address certain issues in. You could also have a case where it could help us prevent the concentration of power. At the moment, we know that the frontier labs and the labs leading in the process of ensuring that AI systems are built, especially advanced AI systems, much of these labs are concentrated in North America. And we're beginning to see that tech companies are having undue influence over the political landscape. We talk about social media platforms and how they influence political discussion or political discourses. So it's important to talk about this so we could identify when there's a power concentration, particularly power concentration in one region of the world or with a few billionaires or tech billionaires. So AI risks in Africa. I used the International AI Safety Network report, the 2025 report. They broke down the risk into three broad categories, and I just felt that that was a better suited way to identify the risk. Now, Africa, because we don't build the systems, we are at a unique disadvantage. And we are likely to be most impacted by the development of this tool, largely because there are still significant gaps in infrastructure, like access to reliable and consistent electricity, access to internet, access to cloud computing infrastructure that is required to build AI systems. There's also the vulnerability that comes from having to depend on external actors, which are some of the risks I will discuss subsequently. And so these risks are broken down into three, which is risk for malicious use, which is focused on the intentional abuse or weaponization of AI systems for harmful activities. And we have the risk from malfunctions, which is focusing on the negative physical, psychological, reputational, outcomes of using AI systems or when they default. Then we also have the systemic risk. Usually these are risks that are amplified by AI. So the risk that probably exists, but now amplified by AI systems. So I'll spend some time addressing or discussing these risks, and then we could talk about some solutions. So let's talk about risk for malicious use. The first I identified here is risk to democracy and human rights. The risk of misuse of AI-driven technologies could be used for things like surveillance. In cases we've seen this in Africa, where many African leaders do not have a track record for tolerating opposition. So with AI-driven technologies, they are able to possibly monitor and surveil citizens in a way that infringes on human right values or even democratic values. We see this in the case where activists in Zimbabwe are a bit concerned about the use of facial recognition cameras by the police. Also in cases of Uganda, where that has been used to sort of profile people and be able to clamp down on opposition. We also have the risk of manipulation of public opinion. My guess is this is one of the most proliferate risks that people get to talk about very often because we see the adverse effects um, ever so present. We talk about AI generating this type of risk focuses on AI generated deepfakes, disinformations that threaten maybe the democratic processes in Africa and can also lead to the manipulation of public opinions that could have disastrous health and safety consequences. A good example of this would be during the COVID pandemic when there were rumors going around social media platforms on how to protect oneself against COVID. Some people dosed on salts because there were claims that salt could help as preventive measures for that. And the problem with the manipulation of public opinion is sometimes when these cascade, it makes it a lot difficult for governments to be able to put a hold or even put structures in place to be able to quell the effects of these deepfake manipulations. OpenAI's recent report on its safety measures showed that just as recent as the last Ghanaian elections, I think towards the end of last year into early this year, they had to suspend some accounts where people purposely used ChatGPT to generate content that were clearly false to be able to undermine the electoral processes. And we're beginning to see more and more of this going on. And with deepfakes, they are able to create videos and audios with people's voices cloned. And that becomes a lot more complex, particularly in Africa, where we still have a huge literacy challenge. And people are not able to question the veracity of some of the claims being made by these videos or texts that are shared. We also have the risk from external influence. So Africa's engagement currently with AI is often mediated by external actors, and in this case, I'm referring to American and Chinese companies that have huge footprint on the continent because they have the technology and most African innovators and most people who engage with the technology tend to use this through these companies. And what that means is access to data of Africans would often be with these companies, their data centers, and they're able to have access to this data. And then imagine in several cases where this technology, it's been like OpenAI is making effort to work with governments across the world and offer its technology to them. That poses its own security risk for African governments and the like. The other malicious use of this technology includes the risk of militarization and abuse or loss of control of the system. So the AU has actually flagged that there's a lack of regulation around little autonomous weapon system on the continent. And autonomous drone systems, we have seen where malicious actors or violent extremist group, particularly in the Sahel region of West Africa, from West Africa down to North Africa, have taking advantage of militarized unmanned drones and use this technology to commit terrorist activities in the region, making it quite unstable. So there is a fear or there is a challenge with the risk of militarizing this technology. Just very recently, OpenAI signed a deal with the US government where it's going to provide its large language model capability as well as its diffusion model capabilities to the American military. So we're beginning to see the pace at which this technology is being militarized and the effect that would have is yet to be seen. But it is a big risk that we need to talk about. There's also the risk of cyber crimes and financial malpractice, AI-powered phishing attacks, voice cloning targets. African booming tech or fintech sector is becoming something to be very concerned about. Recently in Ghana, cyber criminals use deepfake to impersonate people's voices to be able to carry out mobile money scams. And this is, I'm not sure if you've seen videos of this, but it's quite an interesting thing to see how a person's voice gets cloned, and they often will call the parent or the person, or usually an elderly person or a friend, and say, I'm in dire strait, I need some money. Will you send money to me? And often the person will believe this largely because the voices are cloned, and they use this to hack into people's bank accounts, create very convincing text messages or convincing emails in the tone and the voice of people. And this has exacerbated in the last couple of months. Kenya recently released a cybersecurity report that identified over 840 million cyber attacks directed at financial institutions within the country. There's also the risk and safety of securing, the risk and safety and security of women. Um, AI generated abusive contents, we're beginning to see intensify gender-based violence in cases where we have seen where AI tools have been used to surveil people, and also in cases where they've been used for just to blatantly abuse or create deep fakes in a way that can create reputational damage. Very recently, I saw a Twitter post of a lady who shared a picture of herself, and comments under it, people were asking Grok, which is the AI for X, the AI for Twitter. They were asking Grok to undress the picture, the woman. And we have cases like this where people use AI or deepfake to generate child pornography, or generate a picture of women, just clone their faces and just use deepfake to be able to do that and infringe on the privacy and security of women, creating opportunities for to publicly shame them, which is a big concern that we should be worried about. And talking about the risk from malfunction, here often we are referring to the type of risk where they're often unintended, and but oftentimes they are highly technical. So these are risks like bias, unfairness, or risk on reliability and safety of the system. Now, data is never without context. And oftentimes structural inequalities and cultural prejudices are mirrored in the data sets that we use to train AI systems, and are often amplified. Now, although African innovators are developing novel solutions to address country-specific or context-specific problems across multiple sectors, so we've seen this in healthcare, we've seen this in education, we've seen this in agriculture. Now, the problem is the data set used to train these models are often data set that are heavily Euro-American influenced. And this often creates what is called a context bias, because the reliability and accuracy of these systems becomes questionable. So oftentimes AI recommendation systems that are built heavily on this data would tend to provide out of context responses that are not very useful for the context in which they're used. For example, an AI healthcare system to help with maternal health through WhatsApp, so people are able to chat with the bot through WhatsApp. It recommended a woman queried the system and asked, "Oh, can I do this? I'm pregnant. I'm 6 months pregnant. Can I do this activity?" I can't remember exactly what the activity was, and the system says, "Oh, yes, you can do that." And that was contrary to what the medical doctor would advise. And much of the reason that was happening was because it didn't understand the context in which she was asking the question and the societal context in which she lived in. And so we're beginning to see much of this type of reliability issue and how AI systems, largely because they are trained in different contexts, are unable to properly represent or provide accurate prediction or responses to people, say, from Africa. There's also the issue of bias and fairness. Perhaps this is one of the most documented kind of bias we talk about when we speak about, or the kind of ethical concern we talk about when we speak about AI systems. The absence of diverse and representative data, which is used to train AI systems or create the algorithms for the systems, often, create biases in the system. And large language models, for instance, are documented to been notoriously biased when it comes to things like race, like gender, like religion, or political views. Now, um, we particularly know that facial recognition is one of the key areas that we've often, or examples are often brought up about how AI systems could perpetrate biases. And it's important to know that not only is there need to create mitigating strategies to prevent bias. There's a need for a wider reflection beyond just the technical angle of it, also the socio-technical aspect of it, the sociological aspect, anthropological aspect, the religious aspect of it, the philosophical aspect of it. It's important to address this safety concern from a very broad or using a very broad lens rather than a very restricted technical approach, which is often what we see where we try to debias the data first before we use that to train the model. So the concern is widespread, and so we must look beyond just having a very narrowed way of addressing issues like biases in AI systems. We also have systemic risks. Here would refer to things like labor risk and environmental risk. So AI systems at the moment pose unique economic risks to Africa. And South Africa has, for the last 5 years plus, have been placing a lot of emphasis on Industry 4.0 with the goal to try to ensure that the country is better placed to absorb the shock from AI disruption. Now, AI poses significant economic risk for the continent. With automation happening, it disrupts, path to developmental goals that the continent has set. So many countries on the continent were hoping to emphasize on business outsourcing as a way. So there's a wave, there's been a wave of training people how to do technical work, digital marketing, to learning how to code and the like, with a goal of ensuring that they're able to do business outsourcing projects, just like India did to be able to significantly grow its economy. But unfortunately, with AI system, it means that much of the low-level technical work that will need to be done would now be done by AI systems, and there'll be no need to outsource this to Africa. And so that already creates a huge economic hit. But globally, the International Monetary Fund estimates that about 40% of the global economy is going to be exposed to potential AI disruption. And unfortunately, the job market is not catching up as fast as the job losses that we are beginning to see. There's also the issue of environmental risk that AI poses. Now, environmental risk that AI poses quite broad. We can talk about the carbon dioxide emissions to the issue of scarcity of water, because you need water to cool data centers, to cool the machines in data centers. We also talk about the electricity use of the system. For instance, ChatGPT is said to have used to train ChatGPT 3 use just as much electricity as what 130 US homes would use in a year. That's what was just required to train the model. Now, carbon dioxide emissions are projected to increase more significantly as frontier models are developed. The International Monetary Fund estimates that there will be about 1.7 gigaton worth of data, 1.7 gigatons worth of carbon dioxide that will be emitted between 2025 and 2030. Just to put that in context, that's the equivalent of the entire annual emission of Russia, which is the fourth largest emitter in the world. So that's how much emission AI systems are likely to create in the next 5 years, as we estimate. Now, what can we do about this challenge? I proposed 5 ways I think we could do something about this. One is that we could have a human rights-based approach to AI safety. So AI safety discourse in Africa needs to really be grounded in, human right-based approach. This would help us promote things like values of non-discrimination, privacy, freedom, freedom of expression, and the like, so that in the design and the development of AI system, these principles are ingrained, especially in the process of designing them. We would encourage things like participatory design, where AI innovators on the continent get to engage with the communities they're building for, to be able to ensure that we have, the proper tools, and we're solving the real problems that the community require, and we are also addressing the risk that it poses to this community. We also have, I also proposed the need to develop an AI safety institute. Thankfully, in the next couple of months, hopefully an AI safety lab is going to be created in UCT. But just to give you some context, Africa has no dedicated AI safety network that helps researchers to focus on the risk and how to mitigate the risk of AI, or how to even build tools to mitigate the risk of AI. Kenya is the only country that is part of the Global AI Safety Institute network. And it's still not had an institute, even though Canada, Korea, Japan, the US, Singapore, the UK, and the EU, which are part of that institute, part of that network, have already created their own AI safety institute. There's also a need for us to talk about public literacy. Um, there is a gap. There's both a skill gap and a knowledge gap on when we talk about AI on the continent, and there's a need to talk about building capacity in that regard, and how do we educate people on what the risks are, and how to better identify when something is AI generated, and so it could help us better manage things like disinformation and misinformation, and the manipulation of public trust. Um, with that gap, we need to do a lot of capacity building, also helping policymakers see the urgency, that there is an urgent need for us to be able to address some of this concern. One way we could do it, we could have age appropriate content, so that in high schools or in primary schools, and students are exposed to some of this risk of AI, on how to use it and how to better use it in ethical ways, and how to engage with AI tools. And lastly, I talk about the need to develop early detection systems for Africa, and the need for regulatory enforcement. Now, building early detection system, the idea here is to develop some sort of continent-wide early detection monitoring systems for AI-driven large risks. So risks particularly focused on AI-generated fake, as well as AI-enabled scaled manipulation. Okay, so the manipulation of public trust at scale, we want to be able to identify that. And this often, my suggestion would be to build this for African languages in mind. Many early detection systems we have now is not built with the continent in mind. I am also proposing something similar to the hash sharing database that the Global Internet Forum for Counterterrorism provides. So just to give you an idea of what it is, the hash sharing database is a database that contains materials that have been flagged as AI generated, that is often used for terrorism, violent extremist group and terrorist group use those type of contents to recruit people. And what the hash sharing database does is to share this with partners, so partners across multiple social media platforms, so that if the content moves from Facebook to, say, Twitter, it's being flagged. Or if it moves to Instagram, you can say, this has been identified as a deep fake. So pay attention to it. That sort of network, I think, would require much of that, particularly focus on the African continent, and also understanding the nuances that could create. We also talk about the need for regulatory enforcement. I know many research have emphasized why we need to talk about regulatory enforcement, one of which is that Africa currently, we've been talking about AI strategies, we've talked about AI policies. Many countries are developing policies for data policies and AI policies. However, the actual enforcement, or even the mechanisms for enforcement, often are not in place. And the argument here is that without actual enforcement, we undermine the effectiveness of this regulatory effort. So beyond just drafting these principles or drafting these laws, these strategies, these frameworks, there's a need to build the institutional capacity to ensure the compliance and ensure the compliance of these laws and these policies. Yeah, that's that. I have an article out there on the global security risks of open source AI models. And if you're interested in reading that article, it sheds some more light on how open source models could be useful for the continent, as well as some of the security risks it could pose to the African continent as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Samuel, for that really panoptic view of AI safety in Africa, what's at stake, what are the opportunities for sort of an Africa-centered or African-led approach to AI ethics. I would like to invite attendants to maybe just raise their hand if they've got any questions, and we'll maybe. And when it is your turn to ask a question, please, I'd hope you'd consider coming off putting on your camera to ask a question so that at least Samuel can have some measure of human contact. So I'll see we've got one hand up. So Yantina, you're welcome to start, and then I'll be on the lookout for other questions as well.
Excellent. Thank you, Samuel, for an excellent presentation, and just to encourage everyone to ask questions. So I thought it was really interesting and important that you didn't just confine yourself to thinking about safety only in terms of algorithms, right? What's in the box and how does that work? But actually you articulated a much more ambitious agenda that explores how algorithms are used as well. But that raises some questions for me as well, because I think the way that I've encountered at least, AI safety discussions versus AI, kind of broader AI ethics discussions is different. And I wonder if you could speak to that, to kind of the distinction between an AI ethics agenda, which looks normatively at how AI and tools and applications are shaping the world, and how that relates to the narrower AI safety agenda, which is about the applications themselves, the tools and technologies, and how they can be made to be safe. So that's the first part of my question, is if you can speak to AI safety and AI ethics in conjunction, and whether they're different or an extension of each other. And then I've got another question, which is a more kind of a more ambitious question, I think, which is when we think about safety and we think about what it means to be unsafe, right? There's some elements that I missed from your description. The one is lots of those kind of doomsday scenarios, we're all going to be taken over by AI and all our jobs are going to be, disappear and evaporate, and we're all going to be subjected to what the AI wants us to vote and things like that. A lot of those doomsday scenarios completely ignore that this is often about user behavior, right? This is about people deciding to use AIs in particular ways. And when we think about algorithms, right, the people developing the algorithms, and we think about, well, how do we prevent the problem of bias? What is not in purview is that people decide to use these algorithms in particular ways. People have decided to structure the world in this particular way, which means that some people are marginalized and not represented in data, which means that the algorithms that are developed are not relevant to them. And so where's the user in your consideration, right? So what place does that person have? And then how can we think about other ways of defining safety and what it means to be unsafe? And who should be involved, you think, in deciding that, or in thinking about what it means to be safe or unsafe? It's lots of different questions, but I'm just interested in hearing you reflect on those.
Thanks.
On those aspects. Thank you.
So that's quite that's quite some questions. So I'll try as quickly as possible to run through two parts of it. So the first part was your question on the difference between AI safety and AI ethics. Okay, so what I would say in summary, AI safety asks the question: will this AI system function safely and not harm people? While AI ethics would ask the question: is this AI system being used, is being designed, built, and used in a just and responsible way? Right. That's why very often people conflate or often interchange the concept of AI ethics and responsible use of AI. Right. even though in the literature there appear to be some differences when you speak about them. Now, AI ethics deals with the moral and societal implication of AI systems, such as things like fairness, accountability, transparency, privacy, and the broader impact on human rights and social justice. Why AI safety is often concerned with the AI system itself, how they operate, what the predictable harm or unintended harm could be, and what would happen when they become fully autonomous. I didn't even talk about those, far-reaching risks, which we already are worried about, which you alluded to, some of the doomsday scenario kind of risk. Now, again, AI safety oftentimes is discussed within the broader sense of technical governance of AI systems. So we talk about the technical robustness, the risk mitigation and prevention. It's only very recently we're beginning to see conversations and how to broaden that definition of AI safety to include things like the environment, to include things like the societal harm that AI systems could cause. Many countries are beginning to switch from let me preface by saying many countries in the International AI Safety Institute network are beginning to change the name from AI safety to AI security, right? Because they want to focus primarily on the technical aspect of it, because that's the very measurable aspect they think they can address. And I hope that that answers your question in the first half of it. The second part of it, which I think you talk about, um, sort of like the issue of affordance, how people get to use AI technology, and the impact that that would have. And so one of the biases we talk about when we talk about AI systems is the bias, we call it automation bias, where there's a tendency for you to take the responses of AI systems to be factually correct at all times, and even in cases where AI systems also hallucinate. Many people just assume that that's the right answer because there's been a significant dependence on the system and the responses it produces that we are unable to detect, biases in the systems or in its responses. ChatGPT tries to do something quite interesting here. They include sort of like a small disclaimer under the chat menu. It says ChatGPT can make mistakes. Please check important information. Now that's to help, check things like automation bias, where it's important to be able to identify that some answers are incorrect. Now, fortunately, not many users are knowledgeable enough in a field to be able to identify when the AI system's response is wrong, and so they don't go further to interrogate this. What this could mean is that we might need to build, and I've seen this being done. There's currently I think it's called Cosmos Institute, in the US, that is sponsoring people to build AI technology that challenges several epistemic views. So if you ask a question, rather than just produce a response, it will interrogate your thoughts to say, why are you asking? Like, are you sure you want this, or do you need more responses from this? Do you want me to show you comparison between both of them? And it walks you through the steps, so it refines your thinking process before it provides responses. And the reason for this is that AI systems tend to they tend to rank certain responses over the others, and even just the same way we search, right? If you search on Google, certain things come up on page one, and oftentimes we don't even get to the second page or the third or the fifth or the 50th page on Google, and that could mean certain important work or important responses or writings are not also addressed. So yeah, there's a challenge of affordance and how people choose to use the system, and there's also the risk of automation bias that could come out of that.
If I may, Anya, just a follow-up question. I see there are no questions in the chat. So thank you for that comprehensive response. I think I guess where I'm coming from, I'm a bioethicist. I work in ethics, and personally, I'm a bit concerned when a really broad agenda and a really important agenda, one that considers the environment as well as questions of labor, for instance, and the way that these practices are shaping health and healthcare, when these questions about how we ought to live, right, and how we ought to live with technology get boxed together with very small questions. I mean, they're not small, that's tongue in cheek, but smaller questions about how does an algorithm function, right? So I liked that separation that you outlined at the start, and I wonder what happens when we conflate these two things. You know, that broader question of how ought we live, right? Or how ought we live with this technology? How is this technology shaping what it means to live well? And how do we understand and respond to that question on the African continent? Is a much more ambitious and much bigger project than thinking about, well, what's in the box and how does it work, right? How is this system safe? How do we make sure that the system makes good decisions, that the system doesn't lead to biased decisions, and so on and so forth. So that's, I guess, the basis of my question is to say, well, is there a bigger agenda that we need to be pursuing that isn't simply about AI safety, but that involves lots of different people in that broader question of how we live. But maybe that's more of a comment than a question.
And yeah, I think the short answer will be yes. There is need for that, and that's why it has to be an interdisciplinary effort, particularly as the technology is very key, it's very disruptive, and also far-reaching. It's going to impact practically every sector you can think about, and so it's important to have that type of conversation. Yeah.
Thanks, Yantina and Samuel. I'm going to invite Telesia to ask a question, and then after that, I will read 2 questions in the chat room for you, Samuel. So Telesia, over to you. I think you're on mute. We can't. You're still muted.
Yes. Am I audible now?
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much, and thank you, Segun, for the insight and yeah, an invitation into I would say an emerging field for me, and yeah, which is really interesting. I think my concern is on the African languages, indigenous languages, so to say. This is where my concern is when you talk about, is it when we say that we need to create algorithms that are local or building local capacity. My question would then be, are we so much, again, dependent on external technologies? Is Africa trying to catch up? Are our languages at risk, or will we be saving them, in quotes, if we create algorithms, aligned to our indigenous languages? What are we trying to do? What will happen to our identity then? Are we trying to reinforce, again, colonial languages? This is just my line of thought, and I could just be off, but really disturbing my mind at the moment. Yeah, thank you. I don't know how you get to that, but thank you so much, and really enlightening.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So just to give you some idea of what is currently being done on the continent, there's significant work being done on natural language processing on the continent to be able to better secure or better preserve African languages. Many languages are getting extinct, and part of the ways to do that is to sort of create a digital representation or digital forms of those languages. Meta, which or Facebook, as some people refer to them, formerly Facebook, Meta has got a project called No Language Left Behind, where they are working on preserving over 200 languages that are at risk of being extinct. Now, African languages fall under the category of what we refer to as low-resource languages. So these are languages that probably do not have sufficient data for us to train the equivalent of a large language model, right? To train So no large enough data set or no digital form of some of these languages, and we don't have sufficient writings or audios to be able to do that. And there are many innovators on the continent that are actively doing um, projects to ensure that they'll be able to preserve African languages. One of these is Masekani. So the Masekani group is doing significant work around natural language processing to preserve African language. I know that the Lape is doing some work. It's also a company in South Africa there doing a lot of work to be able to create language models with Africa in mind. And these are indigenous, these are African innovators. They're not external innovators. They're building off sometimes open source technology and open source tools to ensure that we're able to better preserve, the African languages. Even though these languages are considered low resource, we're finding workarounds. So things like creating small language models and not just large language models. We're beginning to see that as innovative ways to circumvent the scarcity of data, and also how unstructured many data of African languages are. We're beginning to see more effort being put into projects like that to ensure that we preserve African languages. To my recommendation, I was recommending that if we build early detection tools, we want to build early detection tools with African languages so that they are better situated, better contextualized when Africans interact with such tools. And I hope that answers your question.
Thanks, Samuel. There's two questions in the chat. So the first one from Paula, who asks what you think legislation to address AI security, ethics, and integrity and responsibility might look like in Africa, especially in relation to the European Union, which have the AI Act. That's followed up by Ciara, who, I get, if I understand correctly, is asking whether or not we can meaningfully regulate in isolation from the broader data landscape. So I guess how might legislation in Africa unfold continentally, and how would it be plugged into global conversations about AI regulation? And then there's a second question. Are there areas from Tando? Are there areas in life where we should restrict AI use for development? For example, can we foresee AI taking on sentient qualities, being able to create and recreate? And I guess should we be looking to restrict, I guess, more that conversation about artificial general consciousness and whether or not that's something that's ethically desirable or a harbinger of unsafe futures?
Okay. Yeah, there's an interesting question. So I'll start with the first one. And what do you think legislation to address AI security and ethics might look like in Africa? So there's something I talk about when I speak about AI regulations. There's a need for foundational legislation. So foundational legislations like data policy or data laws, data protection laws, and privacy laws. There are foundational laws like consumer protection laws that are important to have, intellectual property laws that are equally important to have. And those, you only start to talk about AI regulation when you build on this scaffold, the existing or, previously they're non-AI laws per se, but they are foundational laws that you require to build on top. So I think that also answers the other question. If we can meaningfully talk about regulations outside the broader data landscape, I don't think it's possible. You require data to train AI models. You also require there's a lot of data exchange when you interact with AI models. Sometimes very personal data is shared over those platforms. So I don't think it's possible to be able to isolate that. Now back to the question of what that would look like. I think what it will look like in the case of Africa is that we would have to start enforcing existing laws, and then we would build on those existing laws. And we see many countries doing this. South Africa has a POPI Act, and there's AI strategy being published. Nigeria's got its own national AI strategy being published as well. I think the countries with very significant AI laws, that the EU being the exception to this, Canada as well as China. There are regulations around AI, but even those at the moment are not. Many of them are not yet legally enforceable. I think the EU is about the only one that we have that is, getting to the point where it's very enforceable. But even that also is it's focused mostly on, frontier models, like the large scale AI models. It's not addressing things like open source, the impact on open source AI technology. And there's several aspects of it where there's still gap. And that's because the technology is evolving every day, right? And so I think there's still time. Oftentimes regulations play the catch-up game, but we do require some time to be able to even figure out what the technology is. Because if you had done an AI regulation 5 years ago, you'll be regulating something totally different from what we know AI to be today. And if you regulate it today, it's also going to evolve tomorrow. There are going to be other capabilities the AI systems are able to do that we are not able to cover. To the question of, are there areas we need to restrict AI development? I think they are. The EU AI Act has got categorization across unacceptable risk, high risk. It requires a risk and an impact assessment to be done, right? And in doing that, there's certain type of development of AI that it completely says these are unacceptable. And so yeah, I think there are areas we need to, not even talking about the sentient qualities of AI system, but there are areas that we need to actually put restrictions around AI development, and I think that that's important.
Thanks, Samuel. I have a question about how you frame safety. And so I'm particularly interested if you can speak a bit more about the use of risk in your analysis. So to understand safety in terms of like what risk exposure. And the reason for this question is that I think sometimes, not always, but sometimes risk that frame of risk can assume a universal subject. And so, for example, the conversations about what you just spoke about now, the risk of artificial general intelligence, there's the supposed threat to humanity as a whole, right? Based on ideas about can we control that rogue autonomy. And so, yes, in your presentation, you've already contextualized the discussion on risk to Africa. But I'm curious whether there is the extent of unequal exposure to harm or risk. And so my question is everyone everywhere equally vulnerable? Now, there was one example you gave at the end about generative AI, specifically about sort of women and children. But I guess I'm interested more generally if you could speak about a differentiated account to harm and risk exposure. So what are the different ways in which different Africans located differently have a stake in this idea, in this understanding of AI safety?
That's an interesting question. So AI risks or AI safety concerns are set to likely to disproportionately affect Africa. For instance, job loss. Many developed countries are better placed to address or buffer the effect of AI job disruption as compared to African countries. We still battle. I mentioned the infrastructural gap. We still battle a lot of infrastructural gaps. So there's so much that we as a continent that I feel like would have the most impact from. I mean, even when we talk about the environment, Africa tends to be most impacted by environmental issues from emission as compared to the rest of the world that have also created systems in a way to protect themselves and to plan for things like food safety and the rest. And there's still that gap in Africa. So in terms of the risk, I think the continent is likely to experience a higher or more impactful risk from AI as opposed to not. I hope that responds to it in a nutshell.
Not quite, but so I mean, I guess my only what I was pushing back, not pushing back on, I was just genuinely interested is, so I understand the mapping, the survey of the different risks that Africa is exposed to. But I guess I'm interested is everyone on the continent equally exposed to that risk? So when, for example, we talk about job losses, which jobs? When we talk about environmental catastrophe, like who is at risk of the environment? Who experiences energy insecurity as a result of the location of a data center cropping up? Whose water is cut off? I think those are the questions I was asked. But I'm going to give an opportunity for Adam Clayton, sorry, Ryan Clayton. Well, I noticed your hand has gone down now, but I did remember. Yeah, Ryan Clayton, you can ask a question. You're on mute. Still on mute.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Sorry about that. So my question is specifically related to Africa. Is there currently a specific company or AI producer that is focusing on Africa specific? For example, if I'm an end user to trying to use AI technologies, and I'm asking her a question, is there anyone, I know it's how you input the information that gives you the context, but is there anyone that has generally done more research on an African perspective that could give you more African related questions? I heard what you said in the beginning, but at this moment in time, if I were to go to Copilot versus Manus versus ChatGPT, which one of those could I be more reliant to get sort of a structured African perspective? Or is that not yet where we are, but we'll be going to?
So the longer shot of our response to that is that different AI models respond differently. So it boils down to how you use them, which you alluded to. But I think more importantly is that there are certain tools within AI systems that help, like the search tool. Right now on ChatGPT, you can use search. So if you're looking for something, particularly for Africa, you use the search tool and it will help you rank a response a lot higher than, say, if you use its other tools there, like maybe reasoning tools, right? The same will go for like Perplexity and the rest. So I'm not sure I can give like that would sound like a product review of it, and I don't think I have that much knowledge in it.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sam. Sama, we have we've got like 3 more minutes. We've got a question in the chat from Lorna about whether or not there are any success stories on the continent when it comes to legislative governance of AI that you are able to share.
At the moment, I would say no. It's not that there are countries coming up with legislations that are ensuring that that the development of AI is safe, but it's still a very, in a sense, very burdened field. So we haven't seen, for instance, we haven't seen any government like sue a company for infringement on personal data as it relates to AI. Although we've seen cases of like where governments, like particularly I think Nigerian government, took Meta to court, and issues that have to do with data privacy breaches of data privacy, and like we've also seen that across other countries. But again, just because AI is relatively new, I'm not sure we have any of those success stories yet. If there is, I'm not aware of any.
Okay. And Arabia asks, are there any concerted efforts to mitigate anti-Black data when developing AI? If not, what can we really do?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So this one of the risks I talked about was the risk from bias and discrimination, and I mentioned that that large language models are very notorious for always discriminating in terms of race, gender, and the like. There are technical, the technical ways or techniques currently being used to be able to ensure that biases are sort of detected early in an AI system, or detected in the training data set, so you can weed them off before you train. Sometimes there's a removal of personal identifiable information, so like names, like race, like location, and all that. There's a use of pseudonyms to be able to. There's a use of sometimes randomization of the data to be able to ensure that that type of bias is not carried on through in the data.
Thanks, Samuel. Do we have any other questions? In the chat, what indicators would show that Africa has successfully and effectively adopted AI?
Good question. I think the indicator would be when we start to see that we are developing more, there's more indigenous development of AI, where it's creating more job than we are losing, and where more people are beginning to actively use the technology and trust the technology, and when we even have access to it. I think access is the bigger part of it. Yeah.
Okay. Well, we are right on the 3 o'clock mark. Thank you to all of you who have given up your morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you're logging into this call from. And just to say that this event has been recorded and will be posted on our Ethics Lab website, accompanied by a blog, just sort of synthesizing some of the key insights that Samuel has provided and key questions that he's given us as food for thought. We'll also be reaching out to him for any additional resources he's able to recommend for people interested in exploring this topic further. Samuel, thank you so much for getting up very early in the morning to give us this talk. Really comprehensive overview of different aspects of AI safety and what the stakes and opportunities are for different stakeholders on the African continent. Thank you very much, and we look forward to following your scholarship in the future. And once again, thanks to everyone, and have a good rest of your day, morning, afternoon, evening. Thanks, Samuel.
Thanks for having me.